Nigeria's Aviation Minister, Senator Hadi Sirika, says the nation's national carrier may arrive by the first quarter of 2022. He spoke with reporters Wednesday at the end of a virtual weekly meeting of the Federal Executive Council at the State House and stressed that government was committed in its determination to provide a national carrier for the country. He explained that the initial plan to establish a national carrier in 2021 was affected by the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, adding that the project will be realized by the first quarter of 2022. Well then, we're joined by Folarin Adedeji, Portfolio Manager with Afrinvest Asset Management, joins us now to discuss further. Folarin, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. What do you think Nigeria would have made sufficient economic recovery by 2022 to accommodate this national carrier and its subsequent costs?
Yeah, good morning, Rotos. In my opinion, I don't even think it's the right time for us to be discussing the national carrier as a country. We have so many other issues that we are currently battling with, and I expect that government to be expending the scarce resources that it currently has to those issues. However, if the government is hell-bent on creating a national carrier, I want to believe it should be more of a private-driven initiative where the government owns about maybe 30 to 40% of the new entity, and the private sector will drive 60%. Government sit back, create an enabling environment for the carrier, and takes a dividend. That's the kind of structure I'll be expecting.
Excellent. So should they be, the aviation industry continues to suffer from the effects of the pandemic. We just talked about earlier Singapore Airlines recording a $3.2 billion loss. Analysts say the industry may not recover by 2023 or even 2024. Is that something that should be front and center for government as far as concerns?
Oh yes, definitely. The Nigerian government can't cope with that level of losses, which you just did. If you look at the Singapore airline coming home down to Africa, if you look at South Africa, they recently bailed out South African Airways to the tune of about $635 million. The Nigerian government does not have that kind of resources to be deployed to national carrier. So I think that creates a benchmark for caution. And that the Minister of Aviation should also make sure that the new carrier should be private sector driven. That would be a better option.
Well, what economic priorities? This sounds like an obvious question, but what economic priorities would you place above floating a national carrier?
Oh, so we have issues around education, issues around healthcare, issues around even the government itself, fiscal issues as to revenues. So I would expect this, especially in education, because these are low-hanging fruits which we can actually plug our young teeming population into. In addition to that, we also have issues around even the oil revenue, our current revenue. There's a need for government to quickly pass the PIB bill. That will further elevate income for the federal government as we continue to see more investments towards offshore and onshore oil drilling industry. So I would expect that the government should take education and healthcare very seriously as one of the priority lists, and take the income from oil to actually drive that part of the economy.
Excellent. All right, let's move to the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, the Director General, Mr. Kadir, and his recent comments about the deceleration in headline inflation to 18.12%. Well, what do you make of his comments?
Yeah, he's very correct to be actually concerned. So what people don't understand is inflation is part of the embedded cost of doing business. So you can imagine if manufacturers are currently complaining about inflation at 18.12%. Part of the way the bank will price the loans given to manufacturers with that they would have included inflation as part of that embedded cost. So who then bears the cost? Not the manufacturers. They need to be run efficiently and profitably. So most definitely it's going to be consumers. So I think what he's saying is actually very important, because as inflation keeps rising, cost of doing business will keep rising, cost of funds will keep rising, and that cost will pass on to the consumer. And the consumer is already suffocating in terms of disposable income is shrinking, and that could actually reduce demand for whatever is being manufactured and ultimately affect the manufacturer. So he has every right to be very concerned about inflation.
Thank you so much for that. You're a portfolio manager. How is inflation impacting returns?
Oh, inflation has serious impact on our returns. So you can imagine where, as a portfolio manager, you're trying to beat both inflation rates and you also have your internal order rates. So you look around, you see very few assets where you can invest your fund into. So it keeps you up at night. And for us, as portfolio manager at Afrinvest, we keep investing in defensive sectors and assets, keep protecting our assets in order to generate enough return for our investors.
Okay, great. Well, I was about to ask you, what's the portfolio mix that can combat the high inflationary environment? This, what you just mentioned a few seconds ago.
Yeah, Rotos, it's quite disheartening that I will give you an example. If you have invested in bonds as at the beginning of this year, anyone who has invested in bonds this year is probably making a loss as we speak. So bonds the prices for bonds are beginning to dip as a result of increase in yield, as interest rates, and we all know as a result of also increase in inflation rates. So you can see that even as a portfolio manager, you are limited to the asset classes you can actually put money in. So if bonds are making losses, you look the other way to equities. Equities did very well last year with a return of about 50%. But this year, it's in the negative territory. So for us, we tactically and strategically invested in the market. We are seeing discounts, especially in the bonds market, and we're beginning to pick up some bonds at ridiculous discounts, which would have to wait for those bonds to actually increase, and that's how we make our money. So it's quite disheartening that this year, if you had invested in bonds, you probably are not making any money. And for equities markets, we are looking at defensive stocks, the consumer goods sectors. We are looking at banking, and those are the kind of and telecoms. Those are the kind of industries we are currently invested in.
Great stuff. So still, again, I guess this just Folarin highlights what the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria is saying, in that inflation, I mean, from the real sector to investments, it's a cloud that just hangs over the entire country. I know the central bank target is 9%. What's your take on when we can get anywhere close to that kind of target, I guess, with considering the structural issues that we're facing in the country?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially on the fiscal side. And that's about driving costs down in terms of the cost of governance. And there's also a need for convergence between the fiscal and the monetary side, so that we can have a very clear strategy and policy as to how we are going to tackle inflation. Sincerely, I don't see inflation receding backwards anytime soon, as the insecurity has added to that pressures. Food inflation is currently at double digit of about 22%. We continue to see pressures around that area. So there's a need for a convergence between the monetary and fiscal policy side, so that they can sit down together and come up with policies to actually help reduce inflation. But on the short term, government needs to actually cut the cost of governance, and that will go a long way in actually readdressing inflation.
Going to impact the MPC next week's MPC meeting, the inflation figures?
Oh, okay. I don't expect any significant change in the rates. I expect to see that the committee will probably sit and wait it out. Seeing that inflation has slowed down. It's not rising at a faster pace like it used to, especially when we got the figures for April at 18.12%. So I expect to see them actually watch and wait before they think of even raising rates. So that's what I expect.
Folarin Adedeji, Portfolio Manager, Afrinvest Asset Management Limited. Thank you so much for taking us through inflation and all the other matters facing the nation. So the projected national carrier for Q1 2022. We'll see how that works out.